of the heritage film industry. That's about identities. And I think subjectivity is a much more problematic focus of an art cinema, by which I mean a cinema which is open to experiment. And I want to kind of pursue that notion of the possibilities of an art cinema. Because Murray is right. After Channel 4 became completely driven by the market into the 90s, all of that dawn of possibility that we experienced during the 80s, the kind of possibilities that all of a sudden opened up in Scotland and the UK, undoubtedly they closed down as Channel 4 discovered diseases that nobody ever had heard of before. I mean, as Channel 4 discovered the market, it came down, but it has crept up in other little pockets. I mean, one of the points of attack of the Scotch Reels debate was very much against the enterprise culture, and particularly by its representatives in the Scottish Film Council and the Scottish Film Foundation and all of these areas, because these represented an enterprise culture. And I found the website for Glasgow Film Office. The Glasgow Film Office says creating businesses of scale is essential for the sustainable growth and development of the sector. Glasgow Film Office will work with local production companies and facilities and service companies to help develop more businesses of scale within the city, working with businesses that have demonstrated high growth potential, whatever their size. Not much about culture or identity or subjectivity in there. But I mean, I think the point is that in funding local production companies as part of an enterprise culture, that agencies may stray into funding a local imagination and a local imaginary, and thinking only about the facilities and the service and the capacity for growth, rather than the big defining issues of culture and identity, which preoccupy the desire for a national cinema. Agencies may end up, even if only occasionally, supporting the creativity and individual talent through which difference leaks and on which an experimental art cinema depends. So in a sense, I'm trying to focus on the new possibilities. I'm trying to focus on that area of filmmaking around Red Road, Morven Caller, Ratcatcher, all of these films that we have seen in the 90s and into the 2000s, which actually seem to me to belong to a European art cinema culture, and which actually open out new kind of possibilities of representation. Let me just focus on one of them, which I have written about, which is, which is Lynn Ramsay's Morven Caller from 2001, which was indeed supported by the Glasgow Film Office. And I mean, as you know, I don't know if people know of it. It's an adaptation from a kind of cult novel by Alan Warner. And I mean, I find it particularly interesting because, I mean, Alan Warner, I mean, I had thought, having read Morven Caller, the novel, I had thought, this is unfilmable without voiceover. That the only way, because the novel, if you're familiar with it, is a first-person novel, vernacular first-person novel, West of Scotland vernacular, and very intensely first-personal. Not first-person as simply a narrative device, but it's very subjective. It's very much about the subjectivity. And I'd thought to adapt it, you would have to use voiceover. You would have to hear the voice of the speaker. Lynn Ramsay did it without voiceover. And that seemed to me to raise the questions of subjectivity. It also raised the questions, I mean, it was also quite emphatically a Scottish film. And it's got the kind of standard reference to the landscape and the countryside. The big difference is that what she is doing in the landscape and the countryside here is looking for a good place to bury the bits of her boyfriend who had committed suicide and who she has just sewed up into little bits in the bath. So it's a kind of dark version of the Scottish landscape, and it ends in a peat bog with worms and beetles and the nightmare, the insects of your imagination. So she's playing with, I mean, she is conscious of that appeal of the Scottish landscape, but it's played against in a kind of dark way. And in particular, there's a kind of play between, which I think makes, I mean, this is why I think it might be interesting for teachers. I mean, it may not be interesting for teachers because there's rather a lot of distribution of ecstasy going on in the film. But in a sense, in that kind of debate that we endlessly get into about the novel and the film, the original and the adaptation, Lynn Ramsay's Morven seems to me to actually be more complex than Alan Warner's novel. And it's partly because she can move, using the objectivity of camera, she can move between the subjective. I mean, there's a straight subjective first-person point of view shot here, the guy behind the counter waving to Morven as she walks past. You can shift from that subjective point of view to the objective look at Morven. And you're continually moving from inside Morven to outside Morven. And that's kind of emphasized by the soundtrack. She's listening here to Lee Hazelwood on her iPhone. So I mean, that makes it interesting. The other thing that's really interesting about the comparison is the difference in the ending. Alan Warner's novel finishes with these sentences. I placed both hands on my tummy at the life there, the life growing right in there, the child of the raves. I put my head down and closed my mouth. I started the walking forward into that night. It's a very open ending. There has been no anticipation of the fact that Morven is pregnant at the end of the film. It's a kind of Deus Ex Machina ending at the end. But it's kind of a moment of redemption. And I always felt it was a moment of redemption which actually didn't completely keep faith with the alienation of the novel as a whole. In Lynn Ramsay's film, Morven decides to go back to Spain after having been in Oban. And actually, just as a kind of side note, I think one of the kind of really radical things that Lynn Ramsay did in casting Samantha Morton was to cast an English actress in what in the novel had been a kind of emphatically Scottish role, spoken in the kind of Scottish vernacular, to cast an English actress who was perfectly capable of putting on a Scottish accent, but actually leaving her with her Nottingham accent. That in a sense, it instead of actually Scottishizing the central figure, Morven Callar becomes a migrant worker in Oban. I mean, from the south, migrant worker in Oban, stacking supermarket shelves. At the end of the line, just happens to be there. And nobody in the film seems to come from Oban. So there's a kind of looseness about national identities, which some people might complain about, but it seemed to me that it opened up a whole different set of questions. So Morven goes back to Spain, and she goes to the club, and the ending is just this montage of shots of Morven in ecstasy, clubbing, and fade to black. There is nothing in the ending of this film about the redemptive moment. You can read the redemptive moment into it, but it's left to the audience. So I mean, what I'm saying is that films like that, and I think Red Road does similar things, and there are other films around which are working in the same kind of way, that they're opening up a different kind of space. They're opening up a much more complicated space about identity and subjectivity, and a much more experimental sense of addressing these terms. So let me conclude by returning to screen education. And this comes out of, I'm currently reading Terry Bolus's book, Screen Education from Film Appreciation and Media Studies. I don't know if people have come across it, but it's a bit like reading, I mean, certainly the latter stage of it are a bit like reading one's biography, because Terry Bolus was the president of SEFT, of the Society for Education, Film and Television in London. He was on the editorial board of Screen Education. And he's taken